My name is Mary Phyllis Jones Belt. I was born June 16, 1923.
Oh my. Yeah. Well, actually, at the beginning of the Depression, and as the Depression time was coming, I was quite young, and we lived on my grandparents' farm. My grandparents had a beautiful home. It was out in Kansas on the wheat fields, Kansas, Plain, Kansas. And my grandparents probably had the most beautiful home in the whole area. I didn't realize it when I was a child growing up, but after I was older, and later on saw pictures of my parents, because I moved from there when I was 10 years old. I realized what a beautiful home I had grown up in, out in the farm. Because I lived on the farm, depression didn't affect you like city children, in that if you live on a farm, and if you have a garden, if you're growing your own vegetables, and if you have livestock, and you are butchering a hog when it's season, or even a calf, which we didn't do very often, you had meat, and you had chickens, you had eggs, and you had milk. And if you had milk and eggs and all kinds of vegetables and meat, I never knew what it was to not have good food and have plenty to eat. I wasn't a good eater to begin with, so food wasn't very important to me any more then than it is now in my old age. But, so it didn't affect me as much. These kids that I went to school in this one-room school, these kids all came from farm homes. And, they were dressed, farm kids, came in overalls, and I never thought anything about it. We moved from there when I was 10 years old to Ohio, and that's when I saw the Depression and how it was affecting. I saw children, I was in the 5th and 6th grade, 5th grade when we moved, and then in the 6th grade the next year, and I saw children come to school with ragged clothes almost, holes in their stockings, and that pallor that children got that didn't eat properly, that didn't have balanced nourishment. Many of them needed haircuts, especially the boys. Haircuts so bad. And in our home, my mother sewed for we girls. We were always well dressed because you could buy, in those days, you could buy yard goods and the trim and everything pretty cheap, pretty easily. And my mother was a wonderful seamstress, so I was always probably one of the best dressed kids in the classroom, because my mother just made sure we were dressed properly. And so that was kind of my first exposure to depression. And it affected pretty much that way until the war came. Until the war. Then things changed, very definitely, especially after the war. There was a street in Gamber Street in Mount Vernon, and there were tenement homes there. And we just knew that the children that came out of those homes had so much they lacked, just in good care. Food, clothing, and shelter. You don't know how blessed you are, usually, though, until you're older and grow up. I just took it all for granted. Not a whole lot, because I wasn't old enough, to really realize. Except I just knew there were kids who did not have what I had. In my little one-room school, hey, everybody was equal. We all just came from farm families, and we all knew each other, and we knew our families. And nobody was better than anybody else. We were all just on the same level and all. Yeah. Well, the first actually date I had with him, he took me to the football game. And everybody, because I had never dated anyone in high school. I never dated. Was not interested in anybody in high school. And Bob was always over his age. You know, there was age difference in us. And he had on a corduroy jacket, and it had some kind of an emblem on the back of it. But it wasn't our school colors. The jacket wasn't, nor the emblem wasn't. And later on, the next day when we went back to school, everybody thought I had dated a guy from the opposite team or somebody out of town, because they didn't know this kid, because he was behind us, see. So I was a junior. No, I must have been a senior that year. See, I've kind of lost track of. I think I must have been a senior that year, and he would be just a freshman, see. And that was my experience of official. Actually, he asked me to go to the football game with him. Yeah. So you see, it was a very exciting. And you know, of course, he didn't have any car. Nobody had cars in those days. Nobody in high school had cars. Maybe some from just a very, very few. I don't remember any girls, but boys that came from one of the wealthier families or were working and been able to buy themselves some kind of a car. And of course, we walked. And that was part of the date, was to walk all the way down to the football field and all the way back afterwards. That was the exciting part about it. I have to think about that.
Okay.
Because my sister that did get married, she said, your marriage was made in heaven. And really, I'd have to think, because I've never really thought about that. I have to think on that one. You know, because we had so many, because all stages when I think of the children, but I'll have to say retirement. This 20 years that Bob and I had when we bought that home in Bolingbrook until we moved down here. It was just wonderful, because Bob had that kind of a marriage. We had that kind of marriage. And I always said, when I was in the pastorate with Bob, I had to attend meetings, ladies' meetings, and I had to go with my ladies and go to state meetings and, you know, go here and do. I always went, but I always said, the happiest times was when I was with Bob. If I could just be with Bob. And that's the way it was. When we were retired, I could be with Bob. And we just never lacked for anything to say or anything to do, and we did do a lot of traveling. And thank for the Lord, we were financially independent enough that we were able to come and go. In our years that we were come down to Florida and spend the winters, made dear friends there after going down there so many years. Retirement was just all I could ask for to end the marriage. Well, not everybody has that kind of a marriage. I've heard more than one woman say, I don't know what to do with him. He's in the house all day. I remember when just before Lynn was married, I said to my one lady in church particularly I had bonded with, and her daughter was going to get married a month after Lynn was. And I said to Barb, I think you and I should be the second most beautiful women at the wedding. I says, what would you think about if we would go to a spa and do some exercises and join? because they were offering a deal. I'd seen it in the paper. So she said, yeah, she'd be in favor of that. She was that kind of woman. Fun, a lot of fun to do things with. I forgot. I was going to tell you. I will say this much for you. My girls are at this age where I think if you can have some special effort to take care of your body, and I'll go back now to what I was saying. I was able to, with her, all until the wedding, and I think it was 6 months was supposed to be for the wedding, and didn't lose any weight particularly. That wasn't what we were for there. We were to get our bodies toned up. Yeah, no, I was going to tell you. Bodies all toned up. And even after the wedding, I continued to go. But she didn't. And at that time, too, Bob and I had started riding bikes. We'd had bikes. And started doing more biking out in the country. And it's pretty strenuous driving, but we'd go on just gravel roads. And I had my body really in good condition to go into retirement with. I attribute my good health with the Lord's provision that the reason I've done so well. I was able to take that time of my life and try to keep my body built up. And I got into a walking program. Bob would take the suit when we were in Chicago, living there first in that apartment, the Brad's. He would go out the door to teach, and I would go out the door and I would walk. And I walked maybe 4 miles. I wasn't at the time thinking necessarily that I was toning up my body for old age, but I was able to do it. And I think as long as you're carrying around kids and having kids, you keep your body pretty well toned up, But then there's that time when their kids are old enough and on their own,
Tell us about that.
See, I can't tell you much about that because that was before my day, before I was born. What I know about that is, and that's, we have saved, and the write-up that they made about this in the newspaper, one place, it describes and tells all about how he built it and everything. He started out on a chassis of a Ford. I do know that he started. And he built the first one and traveled with it. But he decided he could do better and he could improve on it and enlarge it. So he worked on it again. And I was only 1 and 2. 2.5, when they traveled with that, and he did evangelistic work and traveled with a tent, and they'd set up the big tent and have tent meetings, and he had a lady that traveled with them, and she played the guitar, and my mother, and she sang duets, and mother, of course, was a pianist. Mother's a fine pianist. And I vaguely remember, and I don't think so much I remember traveling with them and all, as I do remember when my father drove it to Kansas where we were living and parked it in our yard, and I think I remember playing in it, kind of like a playhouse, because he had it fixed so there were bunks in there, just like a trailer house now. The bunks, to sleep in, and he had a stove, and
wow.
I think an ice box, and of course, with me, they had to take some toys along. I know I had a doll buggy, and I know I had a wagon, because I've seen pictures of me. And we had a dog, Joe, my little dog Joe. You know, funny, I don't know, never ever talked to my sisters about it, what they remembered. I don't remember ever talking to them about that.
It just wasn't
They were
something you thought
older.
about.
They were schooling. They were just ready for school, and that's one reason they didn't go out again. Different things happened in my father and mother's lives. That was coming fall, and the kids were school age. They needed to get in school. They had gone to kindergarten, and where he had the last church he had pastored in Mason City, Iowa, was a larger town, and they had a kindergarten. And my sisters, they were so near the same age, they were always in the same grade. They started kindergarten together, and they were always in the same grade. But I don't remember I ever talking to them about, did they remember, you know, because they had been old enough, they would have remembered. Virginia was the oldest, and then Juanita, and they were just a little over a year apart. And you know, my sister was handicapped. Yeah, my sister was born, you know what a spinal bifida baby is? That's what she was.
Okay.
And they never thought she'd even live, and she was premature. And when she was months old, they took her to Lincoln, Nebraska to have her operated on and have that removed. It was right here at the base of her neck. And the doctor said, there's no need of operating. She'll never live. And Father says, I'm a man of faith. I believe if God wants this girl to live, He will. And will you please just do the operation? And he did a bum job because he didn't think he was going to live. And he didn't do a nice job, and she always had a scar and kind of a lump there where he had operated on. Well, she lived. And because she was very slow developing, she learned to walk about the same time Juanita did. They were almost like twins. They were so near the same age.
How far?
She was born in May, and then Juanita was born around December. So they were just a little over a year and 6 months apart.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I've thought about that since we're having all we're doing with Luke. I think about my mother, Violin. They lived out there in Nebraska, a little dinky, one-horse town. Did have a train that went through, train station. My father was a pastor there with Baptist Church. And I just marvel, how did they care for that baby? She was premature to begin with, you know, and now that. And my mother didn't know, I've heard her say, she'd say, I didn't know sickum about babies. She was an only child. And she never had any cousins because she only had an aunt and uncle, and they never had any children. She never grew up around any children. She never even knew what it was, how to care for a baby or anything. And my father had grown up in a large family, and he just really did a lot of the caring for. I can remember when I was real ill, and I had been different. I was kind of a sickly kid all my life. It was my father who would take care of me. He just seemed to know what to do, take care of we kids. Mother was a wonderful mother. She learned a lot, but then they had those two, and then they had a big gap, and then I came along. And my mother was so frugal, she knew how to budget her money, you know, and she knew how to sew, and, you know, they had a garden, and they raised food, you know, their fruit, and they canned, and we were better off than some families in that my mother knew how to work, you know, and it did make a difference. until the war, women didn't work out of the home unless she was a widow lady. Right next door to us was a widow lady. Her husband had been killed, accident, at work. And she was left with 2 boys. And she took in washes. She stayed in the home, but she was always washing. When I'd go over to his house and I'd go inside his house, his mother was always doing the wash. She would take in other people's wash. That's the way she earned her living, yeah. And women, until the war, women were not only here and there. And there were 2 or 3 jobs you could do. You could go to school and and get secretarial training, which would learn to type, take shorthand, and learn to file, those kind of, and you could be a secretary. Or you could be a teacher. You go teacher training and become a teacher, or nurse. Those are about the 3 occupations that are open to girls who wanted to go on, and do something more than they'd seen their mother do. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to get out and earn some more money and kind of live on their own, get away from home, live on their own, and do things like that. It wasn't much different when I came along. There weren't much occupation open. Those were the 3 biggies. And of course, a lot of those, the nurses, many of them went into the war at some phase of the war. Armed forces at some phase, but their nurses training, yeah. Before I went off to college, I was the secretary to the lady who was in charge of the Red Cross office. We were the county seat, and of course we had a Red Cross office, and I was her secretary. And what we would do, especially what we were doing, was caring for and servicing the men who were on furlough or who needed to come home on furlough because of death in the family or maybe birth. They could get furloughs. And some of them could get a furlough if they were from the farm. You get home long enough to help put the crop in or harvest it, either one. And that was our job, was to, so I was connected with the war in that extent that soldiers were coming in and out of our Red Cross place. And I had contact with needs that were in the soldiers' lives, for their family life. And that's what I was doing before I went off to college. And I had taken typing in school and shorthand and all that, and I was her private secretary, and she would dictate all of her letters to me, and I'd type them, and all the communication she had to do with the War Office. Yeah. Things changed. The war changed life in our country, and it wasn't all for the better. Sure. He had a secretary there at that church, and she was on vacation. And so he said, "Phyllis, would you help me out a little bit? You just come in the office here, in my secretary's office, and would you just help out a little bit here until she gets back from vacation?" So I did. And when she came back and found out that I had been in there, her office, and had been working with him, she thought I wanted the job back. And she was really put out if she was losing that job. Well, I heard about that. I can't remember if she told Bob, "Well, just go ahead and have Phyllis." I said, "Oh, don't get off on the wrong foot here with you and me." I said, "I don't want that job." I said, "I am so glad not to be having to go to work 5 days a week. Go in at 8, come home at 5. I said, I've had that. I've had that all my life practically. And I said, I don't want that job. The thing that I really got involved with, I really enjoyed, was music. I found out they had a lot of talent in that church they were not using. And I just began to invite people to participate, and I began to form I then got a men's quartet started singing, and Bob and I had never sung together. Bob had always just done solo work, always. And I decided, maybe we could do a little duet work. So I got Bob and I singing some duets, and I had him soloing, and I had a men's quartet going. And then I found out that what we needed was another good voice. We would make a mixed trio, and we'd be two women and Bob's voice. And we got that one going. And then I got enough people involved that I could plan 3 months ahead for special music in the church of different kind, instrumental music or whatever. Plus, we had a regular choir director, and we had the choir. And we had both an organ and a piano in that room, in that church. And had two ladies, very, very accomplished, did very well. And but that's where I found my niche, was in music. And I really had joy and pleasure. Joy and pleasure. And that's when the Lord began to open up a ministry for me of speaking to women. And I started out, one of the first things they wanted me to do was to speak at their mother-daughter banquet. They always had one. And then they heard about this church. And, oh, would you come and speak our mother-daughter banquet? Oh, would you come and speak with our Bible? Oh, would you come and speak for our Bible study group? And then I went to a state meeting. And when would you speak at the state meeting? And I was developing into quite a opportunity of ministering to women, and that I really did enjoy. I really did. Yeah. There was a song that my Bob, when the grandkids came to stay overnight with us, and they often came. That's one thing we said. I wanted extra bedrooms so the kids could always come. And they started coming. They weren't very old at all when they could come and stand an overnight. And then they extended as they got older, and maybe they stayed 2 overnights, And Bob, I would always go in and pray with the children when I put them down, and Bob would come in and always sing to them. And he had this one little thing. And I thought, I wonder if anyone, I don't know, my girls even remember this song, and I'm trying to think where we learned it, and I don't even remember. But I would like to introduce this to somebody, and immediately I'm thinking of Hannah, because she's the singer in the family. It's a little song, and it's God cares for his children. He knows what is best. For when they are weary, then he gives them sweet rest. Their dear little eyelids, and he does it like this. Their hands are made, by his hands are made, but for little ones resting, a beautiful shade. Because, they were all born, except for Brandon, after we moved to your area. Brandon was born in Columbus, over there while we were over there. But the rest of them, and we saw all those. We saw all of our grandkids born. We went there right after they were born, and held them right after they were born. And that was very unusual for us to be in that situation, that we ended up there. Anyone ever tell you, go to Chicago for your retirement years? That isn't exactly what you think about. Mm-hmm. But for us, it was God's provision for us to be around the grandkids. Well, I can tell you about that because I was so young, so vivid to me. Once a year, they would have what they called, in those days, protracted meetings, which means they would have an outside speaker, an evangelist, to come, and every night for 2 weeks, they would have services. And they were having one of these groups, and the evangelist's name was Manawa. I even remember that. Manawa. And he had 2 girls, young ladies, who traveled with him. One played the piano, and one played a instrument, something like a small, well, it was larger than a ukulele. And they'd sing together with the evangelist. We just thought those girls were the greatest things. And they wore these white dresses. This made such an impression on my older sisters. Well, we were been attending these meetings, and they would do as they did in those days. They gave the altar call, anyone come forward, and we get through that series of meetings, and we're on the last Sunday. And my parents were concerned that Juanita and Virginia, they were older, why they didn't step forward, to make a profession of faith. So they asked us, one of those ladies, Evelyn and Monica, if one of them would come and talk with my sisters. And they did, and explained the plan of salvation, which my sisters knew, but had never responded to. And they did respond, and were saved. And I came back in the pews, and everybody had left the church. And I was over here, across the church aisle, and sitting in a pew. And one of the girls came over to me and said to me, and I was crying. And they said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, nobody will talk to me." And they did explain the plan of salvation, and I accepted the Lord. And I was probably, I'm guessing about 7 years old. Because I left Kansas when I was 10. So I'm thinking I was about 7 years old. And the reason that's all so vivid to me, my father was so happy, so happy. All 3 of his girls accepted the Lord and ready to start their Christian life. And I was so small for my age. I was always much like my Marcia was when she grew up, small. He put me on his shoulders, and walked with me out of the church and into the annex to the church, where they were serving a big carry-in dinner, Sunday afternoon carry-in dinner, which they did. That's what they would do. Now, I can remember that as plain as anything. So I always said that that's when I was saved. Well, as I grew up, there was not too much evidence in my life, apparently. I mean, I grew up in a pastor's home. What more you could expect? I went to church all the time. I was always there for Sunday school and everything. But where I really feel, I really made a decision in my life for my Lord. Some of that will listen to this will know what I'm talking about when I say, at the summer campground meetings in South Dakota, I went out with my parents the first year that camp was formed. And it was very well attended. And there were a lot of young people from the Baptist church that were attending the church, attending the meetings. And what they would do in those days, on Saturday night, before the first meeting was supposed to open, they would go to nearby towns, little towns, and they would have what they called street meetings, and they would advertise the camp was going to open, and the nights that would be there and the hours and the speakers who would be there coming to speak and inviting communities to come. And they would give anybody a chance to give a witness for the Lord. And some of these young people from the Baptist church were standing up and really giving a witness of what the Lord was doing in their lives and all. Well, that got me to thinking. I thought, boy, they sure got something I haven't got. I don't remember anything like that in my life. And when the invitation came to come forward and kneel down in that platform, I knelt and gave my life to the Lord. And I said, Lord, you've got my life. You whatever you want to do in my life, I'm yours. And that was the commitment of my life. And I was ready to go into high school. It was such an important time in my life that I made that decision to take my stand for the Lord as I was going into the high school. And I was being thrown together with a lot of kids my age, you know. So yes, I was saved. I really do believe I was saved as a young child. But, which often happens, and this is what I encourage my girls so, and how I was able to, Bob led Marcia to the Lord. The evangelists in our church led Beth to the Lord, but I was privileged to lead Lynn to the Lord. So important when they make those childhood decisions, and I really believe they're real decisions. But there comes a time later on in their life, you know, they just gotta really, is this real? Is this real in my life, you know? Yeah. And then I thought about so many times how the Lord just led my life from then on. And of course, marrying Bob put a determination on my life for sure, where we have headed. Nobody was much in favor of Bob and I marrying because of the difference in our age. They just weren't too excited when we really began to show a real interest in each other, you know, and saw where things were going. And when he asked my father's hand in marriage, he also asked my mother's hand in marriage. And my mother said, I only have one concern, is the difference in your age. Well, look, I was here and Bob's gone, you know. Mm-hmm. Really. And compared to some marriages later now that we're not thinking so much about age, although I wouldn't advise people to go out looking for someone that's a lot of difference than their age. I do think there's but to Bob and I 4 years, didn't make any difference at all at any stage of our marriage, really. When I was getting ready to graduate from college, what does the Lord want me to do with my life? And I was searching God's Word to give me direction. And He gave me this verse, and it has proven through the years. Every time Bob and I had a major decision to make, I could go back to this verse, and I would say, you showed me before, Lord, that you can work in my life, and you can make my life such a happy, pleasant one in serving you. In the verse He gave me, Psalm 16:11, you will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. And you asked me when was the most happy time of my married life. It's those pleasures forevermore that I experienced, those retirement years, joy and pleasures forevermore. Even when the way was rough, and there were some rough times, not in our marriage, but in our life, in our ministry, Bob's ministry and all. But, he's never to make it a pleasurable life. Can't You can't outgive the Lord giving. Let's remember that. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children.